Everything begins in the middle of a massive plantation. There, our hero named Al Wayne was only concerned with the vegetables that he cultivated with much love and care. He observed his legumes with pride and celebrated because the right season to sell everything was arriving. For Al, there existed no greater dream than working in the fields, taking care of the land, and living as a farmer for the rest of his life. Except that Al was not a normal farmer. He had trained his agricultural skills all the way to level 10, including soil cultivation and fishing. His friend Testa was left impressed because all of Al's skills were at the maximum limit. The problem is that, when Testa suggests joining these skills together to test the result, Al's status begins to change in a bizarre manner. His attack power shoots up until passing 70,000 points, a number so absurd that it makes even Al remain without any reaction. Even so, his priority continues to be taking the legumes to sell in the capital. He does not even try to properly understand that monstrous increase in strength, because none of that has value if the merchandise spoils on the way. Al takes the carriage, follows the road down, and still goes along eating a carrot as if that were just one more common day. Except that the problem comes from the sky. The forest dragon appears again, spewing fire and forcing the adventurers to beat a retreat. A female archer realizes that they are no match and orders the group to fall back. Al looks at the situation and tries to think in the simplest way possible. He does not want to become a hero, does not want to fight, does not want to get involved in trouble. He only needs to distract the dragon for 1 second to pass through with the carriage. So he takes a carrot, aims at the sky, and hurls it as if it were a stone. Except that, with his absurd attack, the carrot pierces through the air like a vegetable missile, hits the dragon, and triggers a gigantic explosion. The S-rank monster is destroyed in the air, while the adventurers remain watching without understanding anything. Al also remains surprised, but concludes that his power really increased too much, puts the worry away for later, and returns to what matters, delivering the legume. When he arrives at the royal capital of Magus, Al presents himself to the guards as a simple village farmer. He enters without problems, but soon gets involved in another mess. A blonde girl appears riding on a runaway horse, screaming to be released, while a hooded man tries to take her by force. The scene turns into chaos in the middle of the street, and she ends up getting in the way right at the wrong time. The horse charges forward, Al reacts by instinct, saves the girl from the fall, and holds her in his arm. The kidnapper, furious, demands that he hand over the girl if he does not want to suffer. Except that Al is not intimidated. When the bandit lunges forward, he uses his perception, dodges at the right time, and knocks the man down with ease. The guards arrive right after and arrest the kidnapper, while the girl thanks Al with a polite smile. She tries to talk, but Al remembers that he is late to sell the legumes and leaves there even before answering properly. Later, already at the market, Al works as if nothing had happened. He evaluates each box, talks with the merchants, and sells his products with pride. Except that the peace does not last. Guards appear trying to prevent him from leaving, and soon the blonde girl emerges once again. He introduces herself as Falwise Magus, the first princess. Al freezes instantly, unable to believe that he saved a princess, and ran away as if he had helped any ordinary person. Fal is not offended. On the contrary, she becomes curious and asks for a favor. She wants Al to serve the royal family. His answer is immediate. Absolutely no way. Al tries to refuse with respect, saying that it is too much responsibility for a farmer. Fal insists and says that the work at the palace pays well, offers position, prestige, and even a massive field near the capital. But Al only thinks about his own rural life. He wants to plant, harvest, sell, and return home. When Fal explains that the man he defeated had an average status of 500 points, and that an ordinary adventurer barely reaches 130, Al realizes that his power is even further out of reality. When she asks to see his status, he refuses, because that absurd number would only create more trouble. At that moment, a female archer returns with a strange piece of information. The forest dragon was defeated, but not by them. Someone destroyed the monster with a mysterious and powerful weapon, and the only clue was the track of a carriage. Fal connects the dots immediately. Cargo, absurd strength, carriage tracks, exploding dragon. Before she can confirm, Al climbs onto the carriage and flees from the capital, desperate to escape any chance of being recruited. Fal watches the dust rising and smiles, making it clear that she will not give up so easily. Meanwhile, inside the castle, the atmosphere turns heavy. Reports point out that monsters are approaching Magus: orcs, dragons, golems, goblins, and other races. The king goes into shock upon hearing that it looks like a second wave coming from the evil world. The worry increases because the dragon's attack and the princess's kidnapping might have been mere distractions. An official named Cecil suspects that everything is revenge from the demons, since the demon king Macbeth was defeated in the past, but the king remembers that they signed a peace pact to prevent a new war. At night, upon arriving home completely exhausted, the day was so long that he only wants to rest, but his new strength continues to cause trouble. Upon trying to open the door, he rips off the doorknob without meaning to. He looks at the broken piece, sighs, and decides to fix that the following day, except that Testa appears outside, desperate, warning that monsters are approaching, and that everyone needs to flee. Al still tries to think about the crops that he should take care of in the morning, but when Testa explains the gravity of the situation, he decides to check the path of the monsters. Upon finding the horde moving through the night, he notices something strange. The monsters ignore the village and the plantations, heading straight to the royal capital. For a moment, he tries to convince himself that that is not his problem, except that his imagination shows the capital in ruins, the logistics halted, the merchandise spoiled, and his legumes losing the only sales market. Then the situation changes completely. If the capital falls, his farmer's life also sinks along with it. The problem stops being the knight's problem and turns, in Al's head, into an agricultural problem. At the same time, the king and Fal are led by Cecil to an isolated path. He says that he is going to scout the road, but soon the trap reveals itself. Cecil displays dark magic, restrains the guards, and declares himself a traitor. In truth, Cecil no longer exists. That man was Romeo Vanded, commander of the First Army of the former Demon King. He never accepted the peace agreement and planned to use the monsters, the kidnapping, and the dragon's attack to destabilize Magus. Romeo reveals that he wanted to take over the country without the people realizing it, occupying the capital from the inside and using the king as a disposable pawn. Fal steps in front of her father and invokes golden shields to contain Romeo's magic. The barrier holds off the attacks for a while, but the demon's strength is absurd and each impact rips away pieces of the defense. Romeo laughs, taunts the princess, and admits that the dragon and the kidnapping failed, but that his plans rarely go wrong. Fal tries to resist, even while trembling, because she knows that if the shield falls, the king dies right there. When the barrier finally begins to give way, Romeo prepares to crush both of them at once, except that the expected explosion does not come. From the ground, Al emerges as if he had dug his own path to the battle. He arrives holding his farmer's tool, Sirius, and the demon remains without understanding how a farmer crossed through his magic. Al explains, with complete naturalness, that he used a secret subterranean excavation technique based on deep plowing, an agricultural method to work the soil layers. Romeo becomes even more irritated, because Al starts talking about microbes, nutrients, roots, and ideal depth for vegetables in the middle of a life or death fight. Romeo charges forward and attacks with his sword. To him, that is just one more thing disrupting the field. Romeo is impressed, retreats, and unleashes his true form, becoming massive, muscular, monstrous, and with a status level of 78. Fal warns that his status is way too high and orders Al to flee. But it is already too late. Romeo concentrates all his strength, covers his body in dark energy, and advances saying that he will crush the boy, as he confronts the monster without taking a step back. When Romeo comes for the final blow, Al responds with the same blunt phrase that he heard so many times that night, and tells the demon to go to hell. The impact is direct, clean, and brutal. Romeo, who was thinking himself invincible, falls defeated with just a single strike. The monsters that accompanied the invasion retreat right after, frightened by the defeat of their commander. Fal, the king, and the guards remain in silence, trying to understand how a farmer solved a national crisis using brute force and farming technique. At the castle, Al receives official thanks from the royal family. Fal says that he saved the kingdom, that the monsters retreated after Romeo's downfall, and that the country is safe thanks to him. Al, without knowing how to handle so much formality, only asks that his legumes not be damaged and that he can still manage to sell everything somewhere. The king takes the opportunity to try to recruit him again, but Al senses the danger approaching and tries to leave before they make up some role for him. When they ask if he is willing to serve the country, he answers that he is not, because he remains just a farmer. Fal realizes that forcing will not work and changes her strategy. She says that she understands his dream of living as a farmer, but in gratitude offers once again the field of 33,000 square meters near the capital. In exchange, Al would only need to register and help whenever monsters threaten the region, since he gained land, a market, and a chance to protect his own agricultural routine. Al accepts the agreement. Fal shakes his hand with a smile, promising to call him from time to time. And Al already begins to feel that his quiet life just got a lot more complicated. In the end, he goes to check out the reward, expecting to find a perfect field to start a new phase of rural life. Except that when he arrives at the land, all he sees is a dry, empty space, full of poor soil and the appearance of an abandoned area. While Fal observes from afar with a satisfied smile, Al stares at that immensity and realizes that he gained months' worth of work. The most absurd farmer in the kingdom saved the capital, defeated a demon, and refused to become a hero, but could not escape the worst enemy of all, a vacant lot pretending to be a gift. And, to make his dual life worse, the princess decides to walk with him through the city, as if a princess walking beside a poor, smelly commoner were something normal. The capital was bustling, full of shops, stalls, and food everywhere. Al looked at cabbages, potatoes, and skewers with that gleam of someone who was truly born to venerate agricultural products. While Fal tried to converse about more noble subjects, he got distracted by any food that appeared in front of him. The princess even finds it strange, asking if he only thinks about eating. But Al answers in the most sincere way possible. He is a farmer, so food truly hits straight to his heart. Except that Fal was not just strolling around for no reason either. She explains that getting to know the people, seeing what they eat, and understanding city life is part of royalty's duties. And in order to walk around without causing a commotion, she left her maid, Albie, pretending to be her at the palace. The girl even uses a magic accessory on her hair to disguise her appearance, so no one there should discover that the real princess was wandering through the city center, with a farmer smelling worse than 10 beggars blended in a blender. During the walk, Fal takes Al to a large and elegant building, which in this case is the Adventurers Guild, because he does not want to be a real adventurer. He only wants to fulfill the condition to take care of the land he received. Fal understands this and even confirms that his dream remains to be a farmer. But before entering, she makes an important request. In there, he must not call her princess. While they are in the guild, her name is Philia. He accepts, somewhat awkwardly, and the two enter. As soon as they step through the door, several adventurers look in his direction. An older man, full of energy, appears welcoming him and pulling Al along, as if he had already known the boy for years. The reception is so exaggerated that Al gets lost, even more so when the guy starts talking loudly and drawing everyone's attention. Luckily, a purple-haired receptionist named Helen appears at the counter and receives Al in a calmer manner. She smiles, welcomes him, and begins to take care of his registration. Except that Al is hungry, and when Helen realizes this, instead of forcing the service, she takes the boy to a table and offers a fruit pie called rukabuko. Al devours the meal, praises the food, and even comments that maybe he will try to plant that someday. Helen is satisfied to see that he enjoyed it, but soon returns to work and asks why he registered as an adventurer if his main occupation on the form is farmer. Al explains that he received land from a certain person, but the condition was to help subdue monsters when necessary, except that he makes it very clear that he does not want to abandon the field. Being an adventurer, for him, would be at most a side job, an annoying obligation in the middle of a farmer's life. Helen thinks he must be quite skilled, but before Al can pass himself off as someone weak and ordinary, disaster comes walking through the door. The group of adventurers who faced the forest dragon appear at the guild and recognize Al right away. Hey comment that he was responsible for taking down the S-rank dragon with a single strike, and the entire hall begins to stare at the boy, as if a living legend had just appeared. Al tries to defend himself by saying that he only threw a vegetable at the monster, as if that made the situation any less absurd. But for everyone there, the story only gets even worse, because the guy defeated a dragon using basically a carrot as a weapon of mass destruction. The veterans introduce themselves to Al. The bald one is named Jake, the short girl is Lamia, and the long-haired young man is Lucas. They say they are eager to work with him, while Al feels his agricultural life getting further and further away. Helen tries to liven up the mood and explains that adventurers start at rank G and go up according to their achievements, but also warns that someone skilled can reach rank S quickly, smiling on the outside while on the inside almost panicking. The last thing he wants is to become a famous hero and be carried far away from the plantation. Luckily, Helen does not force anything. She understands that he wants to start low and allows him to remain at rank G. The first mission is also quite simple, collecting 10 stalks of milk grass in green forest, an herb used as an ingredient for recovery potions. Since Al does not want to spend money on equipment, Helen offers a cloak with defensive power. When he wears the cloak, his appearance changes completely. Al ends up looking much more like an adventurer than he would like. and Helen blushes as if that image had touched upon some ancient memory. She introduces herself better, saying that her name is Helen Rian, and believes that Al can become a great adventurer. Al thanks her, but already makes it clear in his eyes that his dream remains to plant, harvest, and sell. After saying goodbye to Philia, Al goes alone to Green Forest. The mission seems peaceful. He follows the map, searches for the herbs, and counts them one by one until reaching the 9th. Only one stalk of milk grass is missing to complete the task. But then he finds something strange shining on the ground. It was a dark, hard scale, different from anything listed in the guild's report. Al observes the object, checks the notes, and realizes that no monster with that type of scales should exist there. While he tries to understand the situation, he reads an observation on the paper, talking about the behavior of the orcs. The text explains that they have an aggressive mating instinct and can attack other creatures without thinking much. Al feels relieved because he is a man, except that his peace ends that very instant. A huge female orc appears behind him, with a bizarre pink aura, looking at the boy as if he were a perfect prey. Al freezes, tries to talk to her, but the creature advances in a way that is completely out of control. Before the situation turns into an eternal trauma for our farmer, Jake appears from above and takes down the female orc with a heavy blow. The creature falls to the ground and Al realizes that he was saved at the last second. Jake, Lamia, and Lucas arrive right after, joking that being attacked by a female orc on the first day of a mission is too much bad luck even for a novice. Al thanks them, somewhat destroyed on the inside, and shows the scale that he found. Jake analyzes the object and says that that seems to be from an unknown monster, found rarely in Green Forest. He also comments that maybe it is a scale of a black dragon, but that those dragons live at high altitudes, so nobody really knows. The group decides to return before sunset, but at that moment an overwhelming pressure falls upon the forest. The air grows heavy, the light darkens, and everyone feels an absurd presence approaching. Al looks up and sees a gigantic creature passing among the trees, covered in purple energy and red marks. It was a black dragon, or worse, something connected to the so-called evil dragon Ouroboros. Nobody can move. Even Al, who defeated an S-rank dragon, as if it were nothing, freezes on the spot before that monstrous aura. Al tries to view the creature's statistics and goes into shock. Its attack exceeds 230,000, a number so far out of reality that not even the SS rank comes close. The dragon simply ignores the group and continues on its path as if the adventurers did not even exist. That same night, Helen wakes up frightened in her room. She had a nightmare about a girl running, a boy named Rye, a red shadow, and the evil dragon. Upon awakening, she realizes that she is still sleeping in her work clothes and feels shaken. The next day, at the guild, her adoptive mother, Volp, notices that she is worse. Helen admits that she lost her memory again and does not remember anything that happened after returning home the previous night. Volp grows worried because that was not a simple exhaustion. Her memory loss was becoming increasingly frequent. Then Al arrives at the guild wearing Helen's cloak and warns that he needs to report something urgent. He gathers with the guildmaster, Volp, and the veteran adventurers, relating everything about the Black Dragon in Green Forest. The guildmaster almost does not believe it, but Jake confirms that the monster passed by them and disappeared, without attacking, but leaving everyone paralyzed with fear. Lucas affirms that with that power, not even an ordinary hero would stand a chance. Al places the scale on the table and Helen's reaction changes instantly. She looks at the object and begins to have flashes of a girl running, of a shadow, of someone screaming for a sister, and of a monster enveloped in red. The memory comes with a blow and Helen faints before everyone. Al grows worried, but Volp explains later that Helen was found 15 years ago on the banks of the Snooze River. She and her husband adopted the child because she seemed to have no family. Since then, Helen does not remember her own past, and the only thing that remained with her from that time was that cloak. Al realizes that Helen might be connected to the evil dragon Ouroboros in some way, even being just a rank G. He decides to investigate on his own. Volp tries to stop him, saying that that is too dangerous, but Al does not intend to enter the forest without information. He is going to research at the library first. Before leaving, Volp hands over some recovery potions as an advance payment and asks him to report any discovery. Outside, a mailman appears with a letter from Al's mother. The boy goes into shock because he had not even told her that he was in the capital. But the mailman, named Reze, delivers the correspondence as if he knew exactly where he would be. Al accepts the letter, thanks him, and goes to the library. still finding it strange that even the post office seemed to track his life better than he did himself. At the library, Al searches for any record about the evil dragon, but finds almost nothing. He realizes that a monster with 230,000 attack power cannot simply not exist in books. Except that the librarian explains that old damage reports and confidential information can only be accessed by high-rank adventurers. Al tries to insist, grows desperate, and practically begs, but she does not grant access. That is when Fal appears, after discovering that he was at the library through the guild. She uses her authority as a princess and secures the authorization for Al to consult the restricted documents. In the archives, Al and Fal find a report from 15 years ago about the village of Honol, near the Snooze River. The text says that a traveling merchant visited the village to stock up on merchandise, but when he arrived there he found only a mountain of rubble. Everything had been destroyed in a sudden manner. The investigation at the time found dark scales left behind and concluded that they could belong to the evil dragon Ouroboros, a creature that, according to the books, should have died a long time ago after facing its natural enemy, the benevolent dragon Mirage. The problem is that, if the scales were recent, then Ouroboros might be alive. Al decides to investigate the village of Honol the following day, but Fal warns that she will also go with him. Al tries to refuse immediately, because taking a princess to a place destroyed by a dragon seems like the worst possible idea. Except that Fal does not back down. To her, that is also a problem of the kingdom, and one cannot pretend that nothing is happening. In the end, both follow by carriage to the location. When they arrive, they find exactly what the documents described. The village of Honol was reduced to ruins, with broken walls, scattered stones, and old marks of destruction. Even after 15 years, the place still carried a heavy atmosphere. Al observes the rubble trying to find some clue, while Fal feels shaken upon seeing that an entire village simply vanished in that manner. Then Al hears a voice calling for him. Fal hears nothing, but Al begins to follow the sound among the ruins. The voice guides him to an isolated area, near old tombstones and stones covered in inscriptions. When he approaches, a translucent child appears before him. The boy smiles in a sad manner and says that he finally found someone capable of hearing his voice. Fal cannot see him, but notices that Al is talking to the void and remains without understanding anything. Al stares at that spirit and asks if he is what people call a ghost. The boy confirms, his name is Reze, and he was waiting for someone who could listen to him. The princess understands nothing and begins to believe that Al went crazy. Reze, the ghost boy, notices the confusion and remarks something curious. The cloak that Al was wearing was equal to his. Al also notices this and, instead of thinking calmly, has an extremely direct idea. He throws the cloak over Fal, covering the princess entirely as if he were hiding merchandise from the rain. The situation gets strange for a second, because Fal blushes and asks what kind of thing he is doing suddenly. Al only wanted to test the magic of the cloak, but the way he approaches leaves the girl completely awkward. Except that the idea works. As soon as the cloak touches her, Fal finally manages to see Reze floating before the tombstone. She gets so frightened that she almost screams, while Al holds her mouth so as not to interrupt the boy and asks the princess to continue listening. Reze introduces himself and says that he was waiting for a long time for someone capable of hearing his voice. He looks at Al's cloak and explains that that cloak belonged to Helen, the guild's receptionist. Al understands instantly that the connection between them was no coincidence. Reze reveals that Helen is his older sister, and the sole survivor of the tragedy that destroyed that village 15 years ago. Except that, because of the trauma, she sealed her own memories and forgot everything that happened on that day. Upon hearing this, Al and Fal remain in silence. The story of the destroyed village was already heavy, but now it had a face, a name, and a living survivor. Reze says that Helen is in danger because the monster responsible for the massacre promised to return after exactly 15 years, and since that deadline had arrived, she would be the next target. The boy lowers his eyes, clenches his hands, and begs Al to save his sister before the evil dragon. Ouroboros finishes what he started. Then Reze begins to speak about the past. Back then, Helen was still a simple girl from the village of Honol, taking care of her younger brother and calling the boy for lunch. Reze played warrior with a wooden sword, trying to look strong, saying that one day he would become a brave fighter. Helen complained, worried about his injuries, but one could see that she had enormous affection for her brother. To Reze, that concern was exaggerated. To Helen, he was the only person she could not afford to lose. Everything changes when a purple smoke covers the sky. The ground shakes, the houses catch fire, and the black dragon appears over the village, surrounded by dark energy and red marks across his body. People run in desperation, but Ouroboros was not merely attacking to kill. He amused himself with fear. The monster advanced slowly, crushing buildings, letting out roars, making the residents believe that perhaps there was still a chance of escape, only to tear away more desperation from them at the last second. Helen tries to protect Rye and flee, but the dragon plays with both of them as if they were insects. When some people try to resist, Ouroboros gets irritated because he hates seeing humans retaining hope. To him, hope was a poison. He wanted to see people trembling, crying, and completely losing the will to live. Rye, even though small, steps in front of his sister. He tries to attack with his wooden sword, but that does not even tickle. Even so, the boy smiles and tells Helen to run, because he managed to make the dragon pay attention to him. The plan does not work as he expected. Ouroboros notices the boy's courage, becomes even more cruel, and decides to destroy him first. Helen sees her brother being injured and falls into despair. The dragon feeds precisely on that emotion. He explains that he uses the negative energy of the soul as food, and the greater the fear, the greater his power. After devouring the hope of the entire village, he leaves Helen alive on purpose, not out of mercy, but to transform the survivor into a seed of terror. Before leaving, Ouroboros promises to return after 15 years to kill Helen and destroy the rest of the city. And since Rye refused to abandon his sister, the dragon demonstrates a bit of his experience in torturing human beings. He traps the boy's consciousness like a ghost, obliging Rye to exist in that place alone, to one day see his sister fall into the same despair. Rye also discovered the dragon's weak point. Ouroboros' power grows with fear, despair, and guilt, but weakens in the face of hope. Therefore, if someone manages to stand before him without surrendering to terror, the monster's absurd statistics begin to drop. That is why he asks Al to take a message to Helen. The ghost says that he does not regret having saved his sister's life. On the contrary, if she survived, then she must live happily and in the name of everyone. Al understands everything and wastes no time. He scoops Fal into his arms and dashes through the forest at an absurd speed. The princess struggles, completely red-faced, saying that at least he should carry her like a real princess. But Al only thinks that today marks exactly 15 years since Ouroboros promised. If Rye was right, Helen could be in danger at this exact moment. When the two arrive at the capital, Al leaves Fal near the gates and runs to look for Helen. Fal, still dizzy after the forced trip in the farmer's arm, tries to maintain her princess posture. She admits that Al is monstrously strong, but says he needs to study a little about how to treat a girl. Even so, she understands the urgency and decides to help in another way, ordering the soldiers to begin the evacuation and preparing the defense of the city. Meanwhile, Helen had already left alone. Volpe had gone to her room with fruit, but found the bed empty. Guided by the memories returning piece by piece, Helen walks to the forest and finally stands face to face with Ouroboros. The dragon recognizes her immediately. He speaks as if reuniting with a prey kept for a special occasion, reminding her that that was the first time in 15 years that she saw her true nightmare. The memories return with full force. Helen remembers the village, her parents, Rye, the fire, the promise, and above all the guilt she carried without even knowing it. Ouroboros enjoys every second. He taunts the girl, saying that Rye died because of her, that everyone died because she survived, and that now the entire city would be massacred because of her weakness. Helen begins to break from within. She grabs a blade, holds it against herself, and begs the monster to take her life before anyone else dies because of her. Ouroboros is satisfied. To him, that scent of despair was perfect, except that before Helen sinks completely, Al appears and firmly holds her hand. The blade stops halfway, and Helen looks at him without understanding how the boy managed to get there. The dragon also gets irritated because that human interrupted the best moment of the meal. With a brutal paw strike, he hurls Al far away, making his body slam against the trees and raise dust from the ground for a few seconds. It seems that Al was destroyed. Helen screams, but the farmer stands up, breathing heavily, but still alive. He holds the cloak that he received from Helen and realizes that, if not for that defensive cloak, he would have turned into fertilizer from the first strike. Ouroboros gets confused because an ordinary human should not be alive after that. But Al, still staggering, answers in the most foolish way possible, saying that a farmer cannot be exterminated so easily. The dragon charges forward again, trying to crush him, burn his body, and make the boy feel fear. Al dodges, runs, uses the terrain to his advantage, and holds the monster's attention. He knows that he cannot win just by fighting head-on when Ouroboros is full of power. Even so, he continues provoking, calling the dragon sick for feeding on the suffering of others. To the monster, that composure was irritating. To Helen, it was frightening to see someone step in front of her like that. when Helen begins to cry, saying that she does not want anyone else to die because of her. Al finally delivers Reze's message. He says that he met her brother that day, and that the boy asked him to tell her something. He reveals that Reze did not regret having saved his sister. He was happy for managing to protect her, and if Helen survived, then her duty was not to punish herself for the past, but to live happily, so that his sacrifice would have meaning. The words hit Helen as if Reze were speaking directly to her, pulling her hand and saying that he had managed to save her. The guilt begins to lose ground to the memory of the love that Reze had for her, and in that instant, Ouroboros' statistics begin to drop rapidly. The purple energy around the dragon falters, his body loses radiance, and the monster understands too late that Helen's hope is ripping his nourishment away. Al notices the change and stares at the dragon without trembling. He says that he is no longer afraid. Ouroboros, desperate for the first time, dives against him with his mouth open and claws ready to tear everything apart. Except that now the absurd power had already plunged. Al plants his feet on the ground, clenches his fist, and strikes the monster with a direct blow. The impact pierces through the dragon's body. The dark energy shatters into glowing particles and Ouroboros begins to dissolve in the air, vanquished by a farmer who did not want to be a hero. When everything ends, Helen runs to Al, worried about his injuries. He tries to smile and says that he is fine, asking if she is also fine. For a moment it seems that the tragedy has finally ended. Helen cries, but now it is not just despair. It is relief, pain, and Reze's memory returning without destroying her soul. Al looks at her calmly, as if he had managed to save not only a city, but also a person who was trapped in her own past. Except that the peace lasts briefly. Helen approaches, lowers her head against Al's chest, and suddenly a blade enters his body. Blood flows down his clothing and Al freezes without understanding. When he looks down, he sees Helen holding the knife. Then she raises her face slowly, with red eyes and a strange smile, as if something inside her had awakened right at the moment when everyone thought that the nightmare had ended. The boy freezes, looks down, and takes a few seconds to understand that that same girl whom he had just saved was now holding a knife stained with blood. Helen raises her face with a strange smile and an expression that did not match in any way with the gentle person from the guild. Al tries to call her name, but only receives that cold stare back, as if Helen were physically there, but another thing were using her body from within. Even while injured, Al still tries to keep his head in place. He remembers the recovery potion that he received at the guild and grabs the flask to heal himself. Except that the pain from the stab comes too strong. His hand trembles, the glass slips and falls to the ground, shattering right before him. Helen observes that calmly, as if she had just taken away his last chance of reaction. After that, she advances once again, ready to finish the job, and Al barely manages to pull back while holding the wound. Helen laughs in a cruel way, saying that she intended to finish him off right then, but that she still wanted to play a little more. Al tries to understand why she would do something like that, except that the answer comes from another present. Suddenly, a barrier of ice and light appears between the two, blocking the attack. A huge white dragon emerges behind Al, with glowing wings and an aura completely different from the rotten energy of Ouroboros. It was Mirage, the benevolent dragon, that same legendary being that ancient records said had faced the evil dragon in the past. Mirage warns Al to stay calm, because Helen was not acting of her own free will. The girl was being possessed by Ouroboros. The malevolent dragon had lost his body, but managed to survive with a consciousness clinging to her soul, waiting for the right moment to assume control. And, since Helen still carried marks of that trauma from 15 years ago, Ouroboros used that breach to return. The problem is that Mirage was also at his limit. He had appeared to prevent the worst, but his body was weak and could not fight for much longer. Ouroboros, using Helen's voice and face, taunts Mirage and says that the white dragon no longer had the strength to protect them. The white energy enters the farmer's body and seals part of the wound, but the effort almost brings the benevolent dragon down to the ground. He admits that that body would not last, so he hands over the rest of his strength to Al and says that, if the boy manages to deactivate Helen's defenses, perhaps it is still possible to purify her. Al understands the message, but the situation is absurd. To save Helen, he would have to strike her, and it was not just any blow. It needed to be strong enough to shatter the possession, but without killing the girl in the process. Ouroboros notices the hesitation and amuses himself, asking if Al would have the courage to attack a friend. Helen, even while possessed, still manages to show a bit of her own will through her gaze. She did not want to hurt anyone with her own hands, and that silent plea makes Al make the most difficult decision of that night. He charges forward and, rapidly, Ouroboros tries to cut him with the knife, but upon passing by the blade, Al grabs Helen's arm and connects a direct punch to her. The impact throws the girl backward and makes her body fall to the ground. For a second, it seems way too cruel, but the strike works. The dark energy begins to release itself from Helen like smoke, and her true consciousness returns to breathe. Ouroboros is ripped out from inside the girl, furious at having been expelled, and decides to search for a new body immediately. The target now was the powerful farmer. The shadow of the evil dragon invades the farmer's mind like a purple storm. Ouroboros enters expecting to find fear, guilt, trauma, loneliness, anything that he could use to dominate that human. Except that when he gets in there, he finds a completely different scenario. There was no abyss of despair, nor dark memories hidden away. There was only a massive field, plowed soil, seeds being planted, and Al working in silence, as if nothing in the world were more important than preparing the soil, leaving Ouroboros without understanding anything. He looks around searching for some weak point, but only finds the mind of a guy obsessed with farming. Al was right there, cultivating the land, worried about nutrients, straight rows, and the future of the tomatoes. To the evil dragon, that was practically a personal hell. There existed no despair for him to devour, only an absurd desire to plant. The more he tried to enter, the more he was repelled by that emotional vacuum completely focused on agriculture. In the end, Al's own mind spits Ouroboros out as if it were ripping a weed out of the field. Al awakens for an instant, but his body had already passed the limit. He faints right after, while Mirage takes advantage of the final window. The benevolent dragon gathers everything that still remained of his power and unleashes a gigantic light against Ouroboros. The white energy covers the forest, pierces through the darkness, and destroys the soul of the evil dragon once and for all. The purple cloud dissolves in the sky, the pressure vanishes. Mirage disappears amidst the light, satisfied to finally conclude a curse that lasted far too many years. The next day, Al wakes up in a bed at the guild's clinic, completely broken, but alive. Upon opening his eyes, he finds Helen and Fal beside him. Both feel relieved and Fal almost collapses on top of him, while Al tries to act as if everything were fine. But one can see that he is still somewhat lost after getting beaten, stabbed, and possessed by the malevolent dragon on the very same day. Helen explains that Ouroboros was purified safely thanks to him and Mirage, and Al can only smile, happy that everyone survived. Except that Helen also realizes that something changed within her. After the possession, part of Ouroboros' power remained in her body, but without the malevolent consciousness. Her hand darkens for a second, gains a monstrous appearance, and then returns to normal. Al almost falls out of bed thinking that the dragon had returned, but Helen shows that now she can control that freely. She explains that, in the beginning, she thought that power only served to kill people, but after everything that happened, she decided to try to use it to protect. If that strength was born from a tragedy, at least from then on it could serve to save someone. The conversation becomes lighter when Fal notices a certain intimacy between Helen and Al. She begins to ask what kind of relationship the two have, and Al tries to explain himself in the most disastrous way possible. He says that Fal, or rather, Philia, is just a childhood friend, which leaves Helen curious and the princess somewhat without reaction. The atmosphere gets even stranger when the adventurers from the guild come running into the room, desperate to know if Helen was fine. Jake, Lamia, Lucas, and the others crowd the place, and in a few seconds Al's recovery turns into a mess. When they discover that Al defeated Ouroboros, the guild members decide to celebrate immediately. The guild master appears happy as can be, calling Al a great adventurer, even if the boy continues trying to flee from that title with all his strength. The party begins. Everyone raises mugs, toasts to the defeat of the dragon, and treats all like a star. He tries to drink juice in moderation, but the master orders everyone to eat, drink, and grow strong to work the next day. To Al, that was already getting way too dangerous. He needed to return home before someone turned his agricultural life into a celebrity life. In the middle of the celebration, some adventurers try to pull Al to drink more, while he insists that he needs to take care of the potato harvest the next day. Fal notices this and comments that, even after saving the city, he is already thinking about the field again. Al does not deny it. To him, the world could even be full of dragons, demons, and possessions, but a delayed harvest remained a serious problem. Fal thanks him for his effort and Al answers that he was happy that she trusted him. The princess smiles, but soon remembers the scene in which she stood at the top of the castle ready to defend the city, thinking that someone like him was not made to look defenseless. The next day, Al is working in the field with Testa, trying to recover a normal routine. Testa comments that it is difficult to take care of both the capital's fields and the village of seals at the same time, but Al answers that it is precisely in the field where he is happiest. While the two converse, Reze, the swift messenger, appears out of nowhere bringing another letter. Al gets impressed because the boy always finds him anywhere, and Reze merely introduces himself as a professional before vanishing in a cloud of dust. The letter was from Al's parents. They notify that they moved to Larugos and ask their son to visit them when he can. Testa grows curious, asking if that is urgent or even a love letter, but Al realizes that it is just a family invitation. Even so, the message touches him a little. It has been a long time since he visited his parents, and Testa reminds him that perhaps they are missing their son. Al thinks about going, but tries to convince himself that he still has guild missions, harvests, and tasks to finish before traveling. Except that fate throws the perfect argument right at his face in the form of a tomato. At the market, Al finds an absurdly beautiful, red, shiny tomato with a fresh scent. Upon tasting it, he practically enters a trance. The sweetness, acidity, and freshness were so good that he forgets any worry and begins to press the vendor to discover where that tomato was cultivated. The man explains that the tomatoes came from Larugos and that apparently they use an uncommon fertilizer over there, responsible for making the flavor so striking. Al runs to the guild and asks for time off from missions, explaining to Helen that his parents are in Larugos and that he also wants to investigate that fertilizer. Helen understands, but takes the opportunity to ask if he could take some monster suppression missions along the way. Since she now takes care of that type of task, Al realizes the danger too late. If he accepted everything, the family trip would turn into adventurer work. After securing the release, Al tries to leave the guild discreetly, but Fal appears outside with a bag, ready to accompany him. She says that she cannot register at the guild, but can go along as a companion and even increase her own rank little by little. Al tries to refuse, explaining that he is going to visit his parents and that this trip is personal. But Fal insists that precisely for that reason she should go greet them. Al is left without an exit, until he remembers that his life works better when he flees before the conversation gets worse. So he dashes down the street, leaving Fal behind with dust in her face. Already on the way to Larugos, Al crosses the forest alone. Excited with the idea of finding the tomato's fertilizer, he tries to convince himself that finally nothing problematic will happen. After all, Ouroboros has already been eliminated, Mirage disappeared in peace, Helen is alive, and now all he needs to do is visit his parents and research fertilizer. Except that, since his life does not respect a single second of tranquility, a strange presence emerges among the trees. A massive orc appears blocking the path. Al gets on alert, but when the monster stretches out its hand, he interprets that in the most naive way possible. Perhaps it was a sign of friendship. Perhaps the orc, despite being terrifying, only wanted to get closer. Al tries to rationalize that not every monster needs to be an enemy, until he notices a horrible detail. That orc was male, and his look had nothing friendly about it. The farmer panics in that very instant. Al tries to flee, shouting that he is in a hurry, and that he does not like orcs. But the monster grabs him with ease, and his fear is so genuine that it seems greater than the fear he had before dragons. Except that before the worst happens, a girl with blue hair appears at high speed, strikes the orc, and hurls the monster far away. When the girl approaches and asks if he is fine, the farmer who only wanted to travel in peace behind a legendary fertilizer ends up being saved by a new stranger in the middle of the forest. Al was still trying to rid himself of the orc when the situation had already crossed from dangerous to humiliating. The massive monster held the farmer as if he had found perfect prey, and Al shouted, saying that he was in a hurry, that he needed to reach Larugos, and that he had absolutely no interest in making friends with any orc. Except that the beast did not want to talk, and by the looks of it, did not want to fight in the normal way either. When Al begins to think that that would be the most embarrassing end possible for a guy who had already faced the evil dragon, she realizes that the trauma was not small, offers water, and comments that he seemed more frightened than injured. Al drinks, almost choking, and admits, without trying to play the tough guy, that he hates orcs. It is no ordinary fear, it is a spiritual weakness. Dragons, demons, monsters of absurd rank, all of those he can even face. But an orc coming close like that already triggers in him a sincere desire to abandon the world and become a potato root. The girl finds it strange when he says that he works as an adventurer, even while looking like a novice lost in the woods. Al explains that he started recently, but that his primary work continues to be agriculture. He introduces himself as Al Wayne, and the girl finally relaxes a bit. saying that her name is Ruri. She says that that forest is dangerous for someone to travel alone, even more so without an armed escort. Al tries to say that he can manage, but soon remembers the orc from seconds ago and loses any moral ground to defend that argument. Ruri realizes that if she lets Al continue alone, perhaps another orc will appear and he will collapse again. For that reason, she decides to escort him to Larugo's. He accepts immediately, because a strong warrior accompanying the way seems like a much safer solution than trusting his own luck. Except that the journey barely begins, and both already feel a presence approaching along the road. Ruri draws her sword, ready to fight, while Al also gets on alert, thinking another monster has appeared. But it was no monster. It was Reze, the swift messenger, emerging in the middle of the forest as if the laws of location did not apply to him. The boy appears with a letter for Al, and Ruri looks at that in disbelief. She asks if that was normal, because no delivery boy should cross a forest full of magical beasts just to deliver mail. Al, already accustomed to the absurd, shows that he receives an absurd amount of letters, mainly from his mother, and comments that Reze always finds a way to locate him, almost choking. To him, encountering out of nowhere the descendant of the legendary hero in the middle of the forest would already be absurd enough. But Ruri speaks of it as if it were merely a tiresome family responsibility. She says that she travels to train, and that she heard strange rumors about accidents in Larugo's. People were supposedly being attacked or disappearing. Some claimed to have seen demons, but no one could properly remember the detail. As a descendant of the hero, she thought she ought to investigate. During the night, Ruri prepares food using the ingredients she brought. Al tastes it and gets impressed. Even on an improvised trip, her food had good flavor, and he begins to analyze it as if he were judging a top-tier harvest. He comments on the balance of the potatoes, the carrots, the sweetness, and even the influence of the soil and microorganism. Ruri listens to that with a somewhat bewildered smile, because to her it was just a simple meal. But to Al, any well-made food becomes practically a lesson in agriculture. When it comes time to sleep, as Al tries to stay outside the tent, he finds it strange to sleep in the same space as Ruri, mainly because they had just met, except the girl argues that if he sleeps out in the open, he might wake up being carried off by orcs. The word orc changes everything, with Al entering the tent in that same second, pretending that that decision was made out of logic and not out of pure panic. Inside, Ruri says that she wants to chat a bit before sleeping. She seems happy to have company, as if that were the first time in a long while that she could travel with someone without carrying everything alone. Al agrees to chat, but the girl falls asleep almost immediately. He realizes too late that Ruri is not only strong, but also a sleepwalker. During the night, she rolls over, invades his space, pushes, kicks, and traps the farmer in the corner, as if she were fighting monsters inside her dream. Al spends the night being beaten by a sleeping heroine, and when he tries to escape outside the tent, he is already too destroyed to react. The next day, the two finally arrive in Larugo's. Ruri gets excited because it was her first time in the city, while Al observes the place with a bit of nostalgia. He comments that he spent a long time in a village and that he rarely went out, so that trip also carried familiar weight. Ruri understands, and before saying goodbye, says that the trip was fun. She asks that, if there is another opportunity, I'll call for her again. Al, being smart, immediately asks for an escort for when he leaves the city. After all, if the forest still has orcs, he does not intend to repeat the experience alone. The two separate, with Al heading to his parents' house, while Ruri begins to investigate the rumors about demons, except that the city seems far too peaceful. When she asks the residents, most treat that as a rumor. Some say that, if demons were truly appearing, the news would have already spread. Even so, Ruri does not give up. She knows that rumors that are far too strange are usually born from something. Meanwhile, upon arriving before his family's house, Al cannot even ring the doorbell. Before that, the door practically explodes under his mother's emotional impulse. Lucia appears like a blonde hurricane and leaps onto her son, grabbing Al with so much force that he almost loses his breath. She cries, smiles, and says that she waited for him forever, as if the boy had spent decades missing, while Al tries to say that he has returned home, but his mother gives no room even to breathe. Al's father appears right after and understands everything wrong. Upon seeing a young man being crushed in the arms of his own wife, he does not recognize his son at first and lands a punch on Al. The farmer flies, crashes onto the ground, and finally manages to say that it is him. His father freezes on the spot, repentant. Except that Lucia does not forgive. She becomes furious at him for hitting their own son and drags her husband inside. giving him a beating as if she were correcting a wild animal inside the house. Al realizes that his mother remains exactly as he remembered, perhaps even worse. Lucia is gentle, cooks well, takes care of the house, and seems like the perfect image of a loving mother. The problem is that her love for her son surpasses any healthy limit. She wants to hug Al, feed Al, lock Al inside the house, and just the idea of him having met a girl already makes her expression change. His father tries to tease him by asking about girlfriends and grandchildren, but that immediately becomes a reason to get beaten again. At mealtimes, Lucia puts food into Al's mouth, as if he were still a child. His father tries to compete by showing his own plate, but his food appears burnt, almost as if it had turned into charcoal. Al tries to be polite, but cannot deny that his mother's food is truly good, except that when he comments that Ruri's food was also tasty, Lucia notices a girl's name, and the mood changes on the spot. His mother wants to know who Ruri is, what kind of relationship they have, and if she is more than a friend. Al tries to explain, but the more he talks, the more suspicious it sounds. His father, seeing the chaos, ends up happy, thinking that his son finally found a woman. Lucia freaks out even more, and Al realizes that any talk about women near his mother is a deadly trap. When it comes time to sleep, he still has another problem. His mother was waiting in his room, so Al goes to sleep in his father's bed to escape that obsession. His father accepts, somewhat defeated, as if he were already accustomed to this kind of domestic war. During the night, Al talks with his father about the real reason for the trip. He explains that he is looking for nigari, an ingredient used in fertilizers, because he heard that it makes the Larugos tomatoes incredibly tasty. His father confirms that a salt pan exists in this city and shows a map. He also comments that he has heard rumors of mysterious accidents near the area of the ingredients, and that Ruri might have just gotten involved in this whole situation. Al connects the dots on the spot and realizes the potential danger. While Al rests, Ruri encounters a hooded woman in despair. The woman says that her younger sister was kidnapped by a demon and taken to the Forest of Illusions. Beyond the south gate, Ruri grows tense, because that matches all the rumors she had heard. As the descendant of the hero, she cannot ignore someone calling for help. Even without proof, she immediately departs for the forest. From afar, a man observes everything with a smile. Al wakes up worried and sneaks out to look for Ruri. Upon arriving near the hotel, he hears people commenting that the demons were real, and that a blue-haired girl ran off into the Forest of Illusions after hearing about a kidnapping. He does not think twice. He puts on his cloak, grabs the map, and sets off for the forest, even knowing that the place is full of monsters, and that his greatest weakness could be hidden in any bush. In the middle of the woods, Al finds a hooded woman being attacked by a huge creature, resembling a giant leech. He reacts quickly and defeats the monster with a single blow, saving the woman. She thanks him in a strange way, leaning against him and saying that he is very strong. Al feels uncomfortable, but before understanding the situation, the woman reveals her true form. That was not a victim. It was a monster in disguise, a magical beast that uses human appearance to deceive others. The creature charges forward, but Ruri appears at the last second and cuts the attack short with her sword. Al feels relieved to see her alive, but also frightened by the amount of similar creatures around them. Ruri explains that there are many beasts of that type in the forest, always coming after her after she defeats them. Al then realizes that the girl had been facing that alone for quite a long time. Ruri says it is her duty, because she carries the hero's blood, but Al does not like hearing that. To him, being the descendant of someone famous should not force a person to destroy themselves in silence. It is at that moment that the man who was observing everything appears. He walks calmly among the trees, applauding Ruri, and saying that she truly has courage as expected from the hero's descendant. Except that soon the praise turns into provocation. He says that no demon had actually been seen, that no victim remembered the details, and that the hooded woman conveniently appeared in front of Ruri to pull her into that forest. Everything was set up. Al understands the trap too late. The man smiles and begins to press the girl's exact wound, saying that she strives to act like a heroine, but cannot save anyone. He calls Al a foolish human, and says that someone like him cannot protect anyone either, and Ruri tightens her grip on the sword, trying not to let the provocation enter her heart. But the man does not even mind. He says he found it admirable to see the girl fighting alone for so long, carrying on her back the weight of a title that perhaps did not even suit her. Ruri tries to cut the provocation short at that instant, advancing toward him without waiting for an explanation, except that the enemy moves with absurd ease. Al sees Ruri fall and understands that that man was not just a scammer spreading rumors. The guy finally takes off his hat, introduces himself as Valplora, and reveals that, despite having used Ruri as bait, the true target was always Al. The reason was simple. In a short time, that unknown farmer defeated Romeo, one of the former commanders of the Demon King's army, and then destroyed the malevolent dragon Ouroboros. For the demons, that ceased to be a coincidence and turned into a threat. Al becomes serious when Volp begins talking about eliminating everyone who could disrupt the demon's plan. The enemy does not cite only him. He also mentions Helen for carrying the power left behind by Ouroboros, making it clear that anyone connected to the farmer could end up on the list. Then Al loses his patience. The farmer charges forward with a clenched fist, but Volp receives the attack as if he were playing around. With a swift movement, he dodges, strikes Al, and drives the boy into the ground, opening a crater in the middle of the forest. The impact raises dust, breaks the ground, and leaves Ruri in shock. For a few seconds it seems that Al was wiped out right there, except that our farmer simply puts his hand out of the hole and stands up again, all dirty, scratched, and irritated. Volp gets surprised that he is still conscious, but Al gives the enemy no time to reason. He advances once again, tries to connect a direct punch, is hurled far away, slams onto the ground, stands up again, and keeps going forward. His body is already suffering, but agricultural stubbornness speaks louder. Al did not want to be a hero, did not want a war with demons, but he was also not going to let a guy like that lay a finger on Helen, Ruri, or anyone from the guild. Volp realizes that, even without refined technique, Al is way too problematic. The farmer's strikes hurt for real. Demon regeneration can seal wounds, but it does not prevent the pain or the exhaustion. For that reason, Volp stops playing in hand-to-hand combat and calls the magical beasts of the forest. From the ground beneath the trees emerge giant leeches, purple, squishy monsters filled with teeth that advance from all sides, with all trying to destroy the creatures with punches, while Ruri forces herself up and cuts some with her sword. The problem is that they regenerate far too fast. Even when chopped into pieces, they come back together, and when one of them latches onto someone, it does not let go. Before long, Al ends up trapped by one of those things. The monster's mouth closes around him, its teeth squeeze his clothing, and Volp observes with that calm smile, preparing dark magic to finish the fight. Ruri sees Al trapped and feels despair growing. She tries to move, but her body is still heavy, and guilt begins to crush her head. She remembers every time she heard that she was weak, that she would never be able to honor the blood of the great hero, that she did not have enough power to save anyone. To make matters worse, Volp taunts the girl at that exact point, saying that she failed as a heroine, and that in the end she failed to protect any man who tried to help her. Except that Al was not finished yet. Trapped inside the creature, he feels the bag he was carrying, and remembers the ridiculous reason that brought him to that region. The Nagarni, that material he wanted to use as fertilizer to make tomatoes tastier. Al reaches his hand into the package and scatters the powder over the monster. Instantly, the leeches begin to harden, lose their sheen, and stop regenerating. Ruri does not understand, and Volp also freezes for a second. Al explains, with the utmost naturalness in the world, that Nagari has a coagulating effect and can also be used as a pesticide. In other words, the item he brought to improve tomatoes turned into the perfect weapon against the magical leeches that were healing endlessly. Volp stares at that, unable to believe that his monsters were defeated by agricultural material, even as Al remains injured. The farmer tries to advance once more. Volp mocks him, saying that with that body Al can barely stand up, let alone defeat a demon. But Al answers that this does not matter. If he stands still, Ruri dies. If he flees, Helen could become a target later. Therefore, he will keep moving forward, even if he has to crawl. Those words hit Ruri harder than any sermon. The girl finally understands that she was trying to live as a perfect heroine, when in reality what mattered was to keep protecting people, even if failing, even if feeling fear, even without reaching the ideal that was placed upon her. Al had no sacred power, had no legendary blood, had no hero's posture. And yet he was right there taking a beating to save someone. Ruri grips her sword with both hands and decides that she will not give up either. Volp tries to finish Al off with another spell, but Ruri steps in the way. This time she does not advance driven by obligation, nor by fear of disappointing her family name. She advances because she wants to save Al. When she understands this, a golden light begins to emanate from her body. Volp widens his eyes because he recognizes that power immediately. It was the power of the good god, the force granted to true heroes. Ruri becomes enveloped in an intense aura, mixed with blue and golden energy. Her sword begins to glow and the girl's face changes. The fear is still there, the injuries too, but she does not retreat. Volp tries to launch his magic, but Ruri cuts through the darkness in half and advances, shouting the enemy's name. The sacred strike pierces through Volp's body with absurd force. His energy breaks into pieces, his regeneration fails, and for the first time, the demon loses that irritating smile. Volp still tries to resist, but the light of Ruri's power swallows him completely. His body dissolves, leaving behind only his hat fallen on the ground. Al looks at Ruri with admiration and says that she was incredible. Ruri grows flustered, still breathing heavily, but before she can answer anything, Al finally pays the price for having taken a beating throughout the entire fight. He passes out all at once. When Al wakes up, it is already night. He is lying on Ruri's lap, with the dark sky above and the silent forest around them. The girl took care of him for hours, waiting for him to regain consciousness. Al sits up entirely embarrassed, apologizing for causing trouble. But Ruri only smiles and thanks him. She says that she tried to carry him to the city, but did not know the way back. Then, somewhat blushing, she admits that she ended up liking him. Al takes time to process the sentence and almost treats that as a mission thank you. Ruri notices the farmer's slowness and lets out a low laugh, saying that he really ran away in an absurd way during the battle. Al tries to justify himself, talking about how he was thinking about protecting everyone and becoming the best farmer possible. But before the conversation can continue, a voice echoes among the trees calling his name. Ruri grows confused, but Al recognizes the voice on the spot. It was Lucia, his mother. Just hearing that call was enough. The farmer becomes more terrified than he ever was before Volp. He remembers his childhood, when he would sneak out with Testa to play and his mother would appear out of nowhere, finding the two of them as if she had some supernatural child radar. Ruri notices the voice approaching and asks if that is normal, but Al has already entered survival mode. In his head, if Lucia finds Ruri with him in that situation, the blue-haired girl might die without even understanding her crime. So Al scoops Ruri into his arms without explaining much and dashes through the forest. Ruri turns red, struggles, asks what is happening, but Al only tells her to stay quiet and holds her tightly. After defeating a demon, a giant leech, and malevolent power, the danger of the night was now a possessive mother searching for her son in the middle of the woods. The two manage to reach the city, and Al leaves Ruri safely before sneaking back home. But the house was already far too quiet. When he opens the door carefully, he finds Lucia waiting in the dark, arms crossed, eyes glowing and a smile that made any dragon look friendly. His father appears in the hallway and tries to calm the situation down, only to end up standing in the way of the wrong fury. As always, he takes the brunt of it. The next day, Al prepares to depart. He has already obtained the Nagari. Ruri is fine, Volp was defeated, and the trip to Larugos finally fulfilled its purpose. Except that Lucia tries to prevent her son's departure. She wants him to stay longer, insists that she just reunited with him, and begins to speak as if she could lock Al in that house forever. The farmer takes a deep breath and for the first time stares at his mother with gravity. Al says that he loves his family but needs to live his own life. If she tries to trap him, if she tries to prevent him from returning to the field and to the people who wait for him, he might end up hating his own mother. The sentence hits Lucia like a strike. She goes silent, realizes that she crossed the line, and finally agrees to let her son go. Not because she stopped caring, but because she understands that loving Al does not mean controlling his every step. Upon parting, Lucia asks if he still wants to continue being a farmer. Al answers without hesitation that he does. He chose this path because he likes the soil, the harvest, and the simple life he tries to protect, even if the world keeps throwing demons, dragons, and princesses in his path. His father also says goodbye, still somewhat destroyed by the domestic turmoil, but happy to see his son moving forward. Outside, Ruri waits for Al on the road. She decided to accompany him back to the city, not only as an escort against orcs, but also because now she wants to stay close. Al continues carrying the Nagari as if it were agricultural treasure, while Ruri walks beside him with a lighter smile. And so, after nearly dying in a forest because of tomato fertilizer, the farmer returns home with a new ally, without imagining that the demons were still only beginning to move. The mood in the castle was already heavy. Under the rain, Val stares at her own father and confirms that she has already made a decision. The king tries to ask if she is certain, but the princess does not back down. She knows that the kingdom's situation is turning dire. She knows that the monster attacks have begun to affect commerce, and even with a heavy heart, she agrees to do something she clearly did not want to do. The king blames himself for being unable to protect his daughter or the country, but Val forces a smile and asks him not to cry. To her, that was just one more princess duty. The next morning, Al arrives at the guild with Ruri, and the reception turns strange from the very first second. Helen sees the blue-haired girl beside him, discovers that she is the descendant of the great hero, and tries to maintain a professional posture. But it becomes clear that the atmosphere has shifted. Ruri also notices Helen's presence and releases that energy of a hidden rival, as if both had understood at the same time that they were looking at someone who could become competition. Al, as usual, notices almost nothing and simply thinks that the two are getting along well. Later, Al returns to the field and tries to recover his normal routine. He is among tomatoes, eggplants, and other crops when he notices a boy messing with the eggplants before time. The boy tries to pick a few, thinking that they were ready, and Al, instead of simply chasing him away, begins to explain in all seriousness that harvesting before the right moment is practically a crime against flavor. To him, a fruit plucked before its time loses strength, loses sweetness, and can become much worse than it should be. Helen and Ruri appear to help with the harvest and find Al giving an agricultural lesson to a hungry child. The boy apologizes, and Al realizes that the situation was not simple. Because of the monster attacks, the distribution of goods from other countries stopped, food prices rose, and poorer people began having difficulty even buying food. Upon hearing this, Al grows serious. Until that moment, the attacks seemed more like an adventurer's problem. But when he understands that this is making people starve, it hits him in a completely different way. Then the sky darkens with wing. Monsters begin to fly over Megis, and soon a horde appears near the walls. Soldiers and adventurers prepare to defend the city. But the sheer quantity is absurd. There are lesser dragons, terrestrial beasts, winged creatures, and monsters of all kinds advancing all at once. Al, Ruri, and Helen run to help. Helen clears a path using her inherited power from Ouroboros, creating a monstrous hand that repels the enemies and even surprises the soldiers. Ruri slashes through the creatures with her sword, and Al uses a hoe as if it were a weapon of war, sending monsters flying away with clean, direct blows. Even so, the soldiers realize that the situation could drag on for far too long. If the attacks continue at this rate, the defense of Megis will not hold out. When everything seems to turn into a battle of attrition, an army arrives kicking up dust on the horizon. At their front appears a man in imposing armor, wielding a shining sword that everyone calls the Holy Sword Levitain. He introduces himself as Prince Netalus, from the kingdom of Antisburg, and raises his sword before the monsters. As soon as the blade shines, the creatures stop. The strange thing is that they are not destroyed. They simply begin to retreat, as if they had received an invisible order. The soldiers celebrate, believing that Megis was saved by the Holy Sword, and Netalus takes advantage of the scene like a true savior. He speaks with authority, promises to protect the kingdom, and turns the moment into perfect propaganda. To the people, that man just appeared at the exact right instant with a legendary weapon. To Al, something does not quite fit together, but he still cannot explain the reason why. That night, Al is at home, alone, trying to understand why he feels so uncomfortable. However, the image of Fal does not leave his head. Then, as if she had felt his thoughts, the princess appears at the door. Al is startled to see her so late, especially with such a sad look on her face. Fal says that she came to say goodbye. Al does not understand at first, thinking that she is going to travel for a little while, but her response hurts more than he ever expected. She is leaving Megis and does not intend to come back. The princess tries to speak calmly, but she is clearly holding back her tears. When Al asks when she is coming back, Fal lowers her face and says that she will not return anymore. Before he can react, her maid appears warning that it is time to go. Fal gets into the carriage, thanks him for everything, and says goodbye. Al runs after her, calls out to her, but the carriage departs down the road, leaving him standing in the dark without understanding what just happened. The next day, Al wakes up more despondent than he would like to admit. Even while working, selling vegetables, and carrying potatoes, his thoughts remain trapped on that farewell. After taking care of a delivery for a woman and her son, who thank him for the vegetables and offer their help as tailors, Rex appears out of nowhere with yet another letter. The swift mailman delivers the correspondence from Al's mother and also brings an extra edition of the newspaper. Al thinks he is just going to receive another suffocating declaration of motherly love, but the newspaper changes everything. The headline announces that Princess Fal is going to marry Prince Netalus, the wielder of the Holy Sword. Ruri and Helen read that along with Al and are completely shocked. At first, it seems that Megis accepted the marriage as payment for the protection of Antisburg. However, the letter from Al's mother brings another layer to the story. Amidst several exaggerated and completely loving sentences, Lucia also reveals absurd information about that so-called sword. According to her, Levitain was not a holy sword, nor was it legendary at all. It was an ordinary weapon, made by an ordinary blacksmith. Helen and Rory understand the immense size of this bombshell. If the sword has no holy power, then the monsters did not retreat because of it. Al connects the dots and realizes that the attacks against Magus were not random. Someone was summoning the monsters, creating widespread panic, and then showing up with a fake solution to gain massive prestige. The plan was simple and disgusting. Antisburg was forcing other kingdoms to rely entirely on their protection. They demanded commercial advantages, gained political influence, and, in the case of Magus, would even take the princess in marriage. The letter also reveals that the person directly responsible for calling the monsters was a demon being forced to obey. His human companion had been captured, and he was attacking kingdoms against his own will to prevent her from suffering. Al becomes furious. It was not just Fal being used as political currency. There was also a demon and an innocent woman trapped inside Nedalus's blackmail. That is when Rex stops acting like a simple mailman. He says that they need to gather immediately and, shortly after, takes charge of the plan. Helen and Rory find his confidence strange, but Rex reveals an unexpected truth. He is also a demon, or more precisely, he belongs to the ones known as Shadow Puppets, an intelligence unit known for gathering secret information. Al almost falls backward. Helen and Rory go into shock and Rex calmly explains that there are demons living among humans, some with no interest whatsoever in war. He himself was raised by Lucius since childhood, which is why he feels much more connected to humans than to violent demons. Rex knows the demon who is being forced to attack Magus. His name is Gazelle, and his greatest crime was loving a human woman. Because of this, Nedalus kidnapped his wife and uses both of them as pawns. Gazelle is forced to send monsters against the cities, while his beloved remains as a hostage. Rex wants to save both of them and, at the same time, expose the farce of the Holy Sword, and if they manage to prove in public that Levitain does not truly repel monsters, Fal's marriage loses all meaning and Antisburg is left with no excuse to control Magus. The plan begins the following day. The woman Al helped prepares tailored clothing for everyone, perfect for the infiltration. Rex secures a carriage and confirms that his contacts have already created a breach to enter Antisburg during the ceremony. The idea is simple in theory and dangerous in practice. Helen, Rory, and Al will infiltrate as part of the goods sent for the wedding, free the hostage, find Gazelle, and force the truth to appear before everyone. Meanwhile, on the other side, Nedalus shows his true face. He treats Gazelle as a tool, threatens to increase the attacks, laughs at the situation, and negotiates with other countries as if the suffering of others were merely a business. To him, Fal is a political conquest, Gazelle is a weapon, and the monsters are just numbers on the board. The prince still tries to approach Fal with wine and elegant conversation, but she refuses. The princess realizes that that place does not suit her at all, but she is trapped by duty and by the promise to protect Magus. On the night before the ceremony, Fal looks out the window and thinks of Al. She believed she had already made up her mind, but deep down she wanted to see him at least one last time. While the princess tries to swallow her sadness alone in Antisburg, Al, Helen, Rory, and Rex prepare to initiate the operation. Fal's wedding was already about to become the grand political spectacle of Antisburg. The city was packed, the streets decorated, the people rushing to see the ceremony, and Nedalus walked through the palace hallways completely satisfied. To him, that was not about love, alliance, or protection. It was just another piece in the plan. With Fal as queen, he would finally have a path to ascend to the throne as king, continue using the fake holy sword as a symbol of power, exploit the demons, bleed Magus dry to the last resource, and turn his lie into real authority. Meanwhile, Fal was already dressed in her wedding gown, standing before the window, trying to swallow her own sadness. Nedalus enters the room with that irritating smile, praises her appearance, and acts as if the princess were already a conquest of his. Fal maintains her posture, but inside she is breaking. The memory of her father saying that her happiness came first still weighs heavy on her chest, but the princess tries to convince herself that this was for the good of the kingdom. Marrying Nedalus meant protecting Magus. At least, that was what she wanted to believe. Outside, Al, Helen, Rory, and Rex finally enter Antisburg. The plan seemed simple when Rex explained it. First, they would rescue Gazelle's wife. Then they would bring the girl to the church to break the blackmail, expose the farce of the sword, and prevent the wedding. The problem is that Al's grand strategy to go unnoticed was to pretend to be a local farmer. He appears wearing farmer's clothes, a hat, a basket full of vegetables, and an absurd confidence that no one would suspect an honest worker carrying produce. Except the plan starts falling apart almost immediately. A guard stops the group and asks why they are delivering vegetables to the palace right on the day of the royal wedding. Al tries to improvise, saying that these are very fresh vegetables and that farmers are not suspicious people. The answer is so bad that it only makes everything worse. Helen and Ruri, wearing disguises that are far too flashy for a secret operation, still try to stay calm. But the soldiers soon realize that there is nothing normal about that group. In seconds, the four are surrounded and the chase begins. Since there was no more time for subtlety, Helen makes the most practical and absurd decision possible. She grabs Al and simply hurls the farmer toward the building where the hostage was imprisoned. Al goes flying through the sky screaming. He crashes through a wall like a human catapult and lands inside the room completely broken, yet still alive. The pink-haired girl, Gazelle's wife, goes into shock upon seeing a farmer burst through the rubble with vegetables on his back. Al tries to introduce himself calmly, but before he can explain properly, the guards storm into the room. They ask who the hell he is, and Al proudly answers that he is a farmer. After that, he charges forward with no weapons whatsoever, using his own basket as an arsenal. He crams radishes, cabbages, and other vegetables into the soldiers' mouths. He knocks them down one by one, even treating it as if he were harvesting a fine crop. The girl realizes that Gazelle really did have allies trying to save her and agrees to go with him. Except getting out of there also turns into total chaos. The guards assemble once again, hallways are blocked off, and Al has to escape carrying the girl on his back, smashing through walls, jumping through windows, and running as if he were late to sell produce at the market. Helen and Ruri follow along outside, holding off the pursuit, until they notice that the church bell has already begun to toll. The ceremony was entering its final stage. Inside the church, Nedalis and Fal stand before the priest. The venue is filled with nobles, soldiers, and representatives from various kingdoms. The priest speaks of unity, wealth, poverty, sickness, and health, while Fal can barely respond. When the time for the kiss arrives, Nedalis approaches slowly, holding her face as if he had already won. Fal closes her eyes and thinks of Al, telling herself that she did not want this. At that exact instant, a door flies down the aisle and hits Nedalis dead on. The prince is sent flying before everyone present, and Al appears at the entrance of the church, completely late, filthy, in farmer's clothes, and with Gazelle's wife on his back. He raises his hand as if he had just arrived for an ordinary meeting, and says that he seems to be a little late. Fal looks at him in disbelief, and for the first time that day, she truly smiles. Nedalis gets up furious and accuses Al of trying to kidnap the princess. But Al does not back down. He confronts the prince right in front of everyone and asserts that the so-called Holy Sword is a complete fraud. The entire church goes into shock. The nobles begin to whisper among themselves. King Gilles demands an explanation, and Nedalis tries to turn everything into a joke, saying that everyone present had already seen the sword repel monsters. To him, it was impossible for anyone to prove otherwise, but Al says that he can prove it, and as if his very words had summoned disaster, the city begins to be attacked by monsters. Winged creatures cover the sky, beasts rush through the streets, and panic spreads in seconds. Outside, Rex used the power of the shadow puppets to summon a horde at the exact right moment. The idea was simple. If the sword was real, it should repel the monsters on its own. If it was fake, Nedalis's lie would crumble before everyone. Nedalis tries to maintain his composure and orders the sword to be brought forth. He desperately looks for Gazelle, expecting the demon to blow the whistle and make the monsters retreat as always. Except Gazelle does not show up as an obedient prisoner. He enters the church holding his wife, now free and safe. Nedalis's face changes instantly, because his greatest piece of blackmail had just escaped. Rex appears right after with the fake holy sword and forces Nedalis to hold it. The prince hesitates, his confidence vanishes, and that alone begins to expose everything. Then Al, fed up with the stalling, grabs the sword and throws it right in front of a monster. Everyone holds their breath, waiting for some holy light, some legendary reaction, any sign of power. But the monster simply bites the blade and snaps the sword as if it were an old toy. The entire church falls dead silent. Gazelle then blows the demonic whistle, and the monsters retreat at that very instant. He explains that there was never any holy sword to begin with. The attacks were controlled by this instrument, which could only be used by demons. Nedalis kidnapped his wife and forced him to send hordes against various countries. Afterward, he would show up as a savior to demand rewards, alliances, and political advantages. Even after being exposed, Netellus still tries to turn the tables. He laughs, revealing that he had sent an enormous horde to Magus during the night, and says that the princess's kingdom should already be falling at this very moment. Except Helen and Rory appear at the church entrance and cut his arrogance short. After the previous attack, the soldiers, adventurers, and the people of Magus did not stand idly by. They all trained, prepared themselves, and were ready to protect the capital with their own hands. Over in Magus, the guild's adventurers, the guards, and even those who were previously simple citizens, were fighting together to prevent any monster from laying a hand on the kingdom. Netellus loses his mind. He tries to use the confusion to take King Jill's hostage, but Al does not let him. The farmer hurls a vegetable directly at him, turning the fake royal posture into a laughingstock in the middle of the church. Then he steps forward and lands a clean blow on the prince, knocking the villain down for good. Netellus falls onto the red carpet, defeated not by a legendary sword, but by an annoyed farmer using brute force and vegetables as if they were official combat gear. With the prince immobilized, the soldiers finally understand everything and arrest his accomplices. Fal runs toward Al, forgets any protocol, and hugs the farmer in front of everyone. The princess says that she loves him, and Al freezes completely, not knowing how to react. Rory goes into shock. Helen watches with a nervous smile, and Rex tries to figure out if that secret operation ended up turning into a public marriage proposal. As King Jills looks on, seeing his daughter happy for the first time since everything began, he decides to speak officially. He thanks Al for saving Fal once again and practically approves the union between the two, leaving the poor farmer even more bewildered. After the confusion, Rex hands the King of Magus a letter found behind the scenes. It had been sent to Netellus by someone unknown, showing that the plan did not originate solely from the prince's mind. There was a figure manipulating everything from the shadows, someone using Netellus as a pawn to incite wars, exploit demons, and meddle with neighboring kingdoms without ever showing themselves. Rex confirms that he will continue investigating, because that seemed connected to something much larger. A few days later, peace returns to Magus. Netellus is imprisoned. Gazelle and his wife are finally free, and the guild is buried under requests as the fame of Al and the others grows even further. The guild master celebrates as if he had won a personal war, while Al only despairs upon seeing the pile of quests growing larger. To him, saving kingdoms might be important, but none of that changed his main objective, working in the field. Fal appears at the guild without a disguise, thanks everyone for their help, and delivers a massive reward from the palace. The adventurers almost throw themselves onto the treasure, and Al tries to back away before someone shoves more responsibility into his hands, except the situation becomes even more complicated when Helen starts suspecting that she had seen the princess before. Al tries to cover it up by saying that Fal possesses a common kind of beauty, the kind anyone can find anywhere, which obviously convinces no one and almost makes everything worse. Later, Al returns to the fields and finally manages to do what he wanted since the beginning of this whole mess: tend to the tomatoes grown with Nagari. He holds a red, shiny, and perfect tomato, satisfied to have proven that the fertilizer truly improves the harvest. For a few seconds, everything seems peaceful, but Al's peace never lasts long. Fal and Rory show up in the field and corner the farmer with the most dangerous question of his life. They want to know who he actually likes. Al tries to dodge the question by talking about tomatoes, potatoes, and deliveries, but the two girls do not let him off easily. Rory reminds him that he risked his life to save Fal, and Fal replies that of all people, she will not accept losing to a rival so easily. Helen is also standing nearby, making the pressure even worse. Al looks at the three of them, glances at his basket of vegetables, calculates his chances of surviving that conversation, and makes the smartest decision possible. He lifts his goods, says he needs to make market deliveries, and bolts out of the field at full speed, leaving the girls behind in the middle of the crops. In the end, after invading a neighboring kingdom, overthrowing princes over a fake sword, and saving the princess at the altar, the most powerful farmer in Magus still did not have enough courage to answer a simple question about romance. After all of that, we go back to long before Al became the absurd farmer who knocks out demons with a single punch. He was just a child in Syl's village, running through crops and helping his father with the harvest. From a young age, the boy already had a strange connection with the land. While other children wanted to play with swords, go on adventures, or hunt for treasure, Al was genuinely happy when he found a perfect potato in the middle of the soil. To him, that was not boring work. It was almost like discovering a legendary treasure hidden underground. His father, Jills, was impressed by that energy. Al could dig, sort, and organize potatoes with an enthusiasm that even adults did not possess. When Jills told him to take a break, the boy still looked disappointed, as if stopping midway through the harvest were a defeat. His mother, Lucia, appeared shortly after with that scary presence of hers as usual. Jills tried to explain that Al was merely helping out, but the mere fact that a young boy was sweating a little was enough for Lucia to nearly turn into a vengeful entity. Even so, the Wayne family was beloved in the village. After the harvest, Al would bring a portion of the potatoes to elderly neighbors, and the residents would thank him warmly. Except near the crops, there was a child living in a completely different way. A young girl with pink hair, covered in dirt, wearing torn clothes and holding a suspicious glare, began appearing to steal vegetables. She did not do it out of malice. She stole because she was starving. The village adults soon surrounded her, calling the girl a thief, and some were already planning to hand her over to a slave trader as a form of payment for everything she had stolen. Al does not accept that, even young as he is. He steps in front and asks why a child like her would need to steal if someone were taking care of her. The residents explain that the girl's parents had disappeared or died, and that she likely lived alone near the mountain. To them, that was her problem. To Al, it was the exact opposite. If everyone knew that a child was alone, starving, and stealing to survive, then pretending nothing was happening was also the village's fault. The situation grows tense, but Jills arrives just in time. Instead of scolding, he pulls out money and pays for everything the girl had stolen. The residents go quiet, left without any further excuse to hand her over. The girl does not understand why that man is helping someone like her, but Jills acts naturally, as if saving a child were the most obvious thing in the world. After that, he takes the girl home, and she comes to live with the Wayne family. Her name was Ilvia. Over time, Ilvia also begins to help out on the farm. She carries baskets, learns to harvest, and watches in awe as Al gets excited over every single agricultural detail. To her, food had always been mere survival. With Al, she begins to view food as something warm, beautiful, and full of care. 2 years pass, and the family begins to think about moving. The house had become too small for 4 people, and Jills comments that perhaps it would be better to look for a larger place in the town. To Al, that seemed like just an ordinary move, but Testa, his childhood friend, ends up telling him the truth. Ilvia was being bullied in the village. Even after being taken in by the Waynes, many people still looked at her as a former vegetable thief, as a troublesome girl who should have never been accepted there. Al becomes furious upon discovering this. He realizes that Ilvia smiled in front of him and helped on the farm, pretending to be fine. Yet she was carrying it all in silence. Moving houses was not just due to a lack of space. It was to distance Ilvia from the people who continued to treat the girl as though she did not deserve a normal life. So, when Testa appears with a story about a hidden treasure near the mountain, Al decides to go along. If they found something valuable, perhaps they could help the family faster and return to Ilvia with good news. The search for the treasure begins as a game, but soon turns strange. Al and Testa follow an old map to an isolated area. They cross the woods and find an ancient structure hidden in the mountain. The place looked like an abandoned dungeon, filled with dark stone, cold corridors, and a heavy atmosphere in the air. The two enter anyway, thinking that the treasure might be inside. However, the further they advance, the less that place seems like a hiding spot and more like a prison for something ancient. At the deep end of the dungeon, Al finds strange inscriptions on the wall. He touches the stone and a purple light begins to spread. A dark presence appears before him, an enormous, distorted entity with menacing eyes and an energy that seemed neither human nor demonic. Al tries to understand what he is seeing, but his body freezes. The entity seems to speak directly to him, as if peering inside the boy's soul. Shortly after, everything explodes into light and Al passes out. Meanwhile, the world outside the dungeon turns into hell. A volcano erupts, spewing smoke, fire, and lava over the region. The earth shakes, the forest burns, the crops are destroyed, and the entire village is swallowed by the disaster. When Al finally wakes up, the green fields he once knew no longer exist. In place of the crops, only ashes, stones, smoke, and a dark sky covering everything remain. The survivors pitch makeshift tents. Nearly all the roads are blocked. The houses are destroyed. The fields have turned to dead soil, and there was not enough food for everyone. Al, still injured from the dungeon, can barely stand up. He remains trapped in recovery while the adults try to organize the few remaining resources. For a boy who loved agriculture more than anything else, seeing the land destroyed in such a way was like losing a part of himself. Ilvia starts taking care of him. Even though she is just a child, she brings food, helps Al drink, changes cloths, and tries to calm him when he blames himself. Al becomes desperate because he cannot help anyone. He wanted to restore the fields. He wanted to produce food. He wanted to do something useful, but his body still would not respond. Ilvia, seeing his pain, tries to smile and says that everything would be alright. Except her own condition was worsening too. Food was far too scarce. Everyone received small portions, barely anything to sustain a child. Ilvia, without telling Al, begins handing over her own portion to him. Day after day, she appears with a bowl, says she has already eaten, and insists that Al feed himself. He believes her because he is weak, confused, and trapped in his own guilt. While Al recovers a little bit of strength, Ilvia grows thinner, paler, and more exhausted. Even so, she continues to smile at him. When Al asks if everything is alright, Ilvia responds that it is. When he tries to stand up, she tells him to rest. When he says that he needs to rebuild the fields, she tells him that she believes in him. To Ilvia, Al was the person who found her one day when everyone else only saw a thief. He gave her food, gave her a home, gave her a family, and gave her a reason to smile. So, in that moment, she decides to give back the only way she can, by keeping Al alive. The truth only comes to light when it is already too late. Al begins to notice that Ilvia is far too weak, that her hands tremble, that she barely has any energy to walk. When he finally realizes that she had been giving her own food to him, the boy goes into complete shock. He tries to deny it, tries to make her eat, tries to call for help. But Ilvia was already at her limit. Malnutrition had consumed her body in silence for many days. Al collapses beside her, begging Ilvia to hold on just a little longer. He says that he will still rebuild the fields, that he will plant again, that he will grow delicious tomatoes for her to eat, but Ilvia can no longer answer like before. In the end, Ilvia dies in Al's arms, and the boy, who had always believed that agriculture meant happiness, learns in the cruelest way possible that food could also mean life or death. He blames himself for not noticing, for having eaten her share, for having gone after a useless treasure while the village marched toward disaster. From that day forward, the dream of being a farmer ceases to be just a personal passion. It becomes a promise. Al wanted to produce food capable of making people smile, but he also wanted to ensure that no one close to him would ever suffer from hunger like that again. After facing memories far too heavy for any person to carry alone, Al returns to the present in the most Al-like way possible, trying to stay alive while the world insists on dropping problems right into his lap. In the middle of the night, he defeats a creature that appears in his path. However, he soon realizes that the real problem was not the fallen monster, but rather an unconscious girl lying on the ground, completely beaten up, breathing very weakly. Al approaches carefully and sees that she is still alive. Since there was no way he could leave a young girl abandoned like that in the middle of the road, he takes her into his arms and carries her home. Yet, even while trying to be gentle, Al grows worried about the entire situation. After all, he had just found an unknown, unconscious girl without any explanation near a dangerous area, and the last thing he needed was to be mistaken for a kidnapper. When the girl wakes up, her first reaction is to look around with that strange calmness of someone who is still trying to figure out where she landed. Her name is Linnea Magnell, and instead of panicking, she asks why she is there, while he tries to explain that he found her unconscious and brought her over to rest. However, Linnea begins to form a completely wrong interpretation, almost as if he had taken advantage of the situation to bring her to his home. Al panics instantly, trying to make it crystal clear that he only helped because she was lying collapsed in the middle of the path, and that he had zero ulterior motives. The confusion grows even worse when Rory appears and finds Linnea wearing borrowed clothes inside Al's home. The blue-haired girl freezes, misinterprets everything, and runs away completely distraught. Al tries to call out to her, but Rory speeds down the road screaming that he is an idiot. Helen also finds out about the situation and tries to keep her composure, but even she looks at Al as if the farmer had gotten himself into yet another absurd mess without even realizing it. After the misunderstanding subsides a little, Linnea explains the real reason behind her journey. She wanted to go to the Adventurers Guild in the capital to make a request. Her hometown, Gulltown, also known as the City of Seagulls, was becoming strange. The people began acting in an artificial manner. Trade came to a halt. No one seemed to care about anything. and even travelers began avoiding the place altogether. Linnea could not explain it properly, but she was certain that something very wrong was taking place. Al listens to that attentively, but he gets genuinely excited when he discovers another detail. Gulltown is famous for its special production of asparagus, and it was not just any ordinary asparagus. To all, that place was practically a sacred land of agriculture, a location so legendary that even ancient records spoke of its striking flavor, firm texture, and that pleasant hint of bitterness that spread through the mouth. The farmer, who seconds before only wanted to escape a romantic misunderstanding, completely changes his mood. If the city of asparagus was in danger, then the investigation had just become a top priority. At the guild, Helen realizes that Linnea is genuinely desperate and agrees to register the request. Since Al was also an adventurer, even while pretending to be just a farmer, she asks him to handle the case. Al accepts with an almost exaggerated level of confidence, because in his mind, this was an agricultural mission. Rory, who was still annoyed by the scene at his home, ends up coming along to get the story straight. And Helen, suspicious that Linnea might be hiding something, decides to monitor everything from afar. The journey to Gulltown begins in an ordinary carriage, but soon turns into yet another personal punishment for Al. On the way, a horde of orcs appears out of nowhere. To any adventurer, that would just be a monster attack. To Al, it is practically the end of the world. He panics, starts imagining the absolute worst-case scenarios, loses his composure, and ends up passing out from fear. When he wakes up, he realizes that Linnea took care of him the entire time, letting his head rest on her lap, as if it were a scene far too peaceful for a guy who just had a complete breakdown because of orcs. Linnea says he was having a nightmare and kept repeating that he was fine. Al tries to act normally, but the situation becomes awkward. The girl speaks calmly, touches him in a gentle way, and says she will observe him closely for a while to find out if she can truly trust him. Al is left speechless, because Linnea has a very direct, almost dangerous sincerity. Right outside the carriage, Rory turns purple with jealousy when she notices the atmosphere and accuses Helen of lying when she said Al was just an innocent farmer. Upon arriving in Gulltown, the group finds a beautiful place, filled with light-colored buildings, little flags in the streets, and a large statue in the center of the square. Except the peaceful appearance does not match the behavior of the people. The residents smile too much, speak in an empty tone, and treat any absurd occurrence as if everything were fine. A vendor offers asparagus crepes and asparagus drinks with a mechanical cheerfulness, while another man drops vegetables on the ground and crushes them completely without showing any reaction. Al sees this and feels deeply bothered. To him, wasting food is practically a sin. When a resident steps on a fallen potato and keeps saying that everything is fine, the farmer understands that this city has truly lost something. It was not just calm, it was as if the people no longer possessed free will. Even basic care for food had completely vanished. Linnea takes all to her home to rest, and there she reveals another important detail. Her family possesses pendants linked to the divine protection of the good god, objects capable of warding off evil. Al notices that her pendant is similar to his own and begins connecting a few dots. Linnea shares that after the city turned strange, her parents disappeared. They were likely taken somewhere, but no one in the city seemed willing to look for them, which is why she set off alone toward the capital, even without knowing if she would survive the journey. While Al tries to make sense of everything, the local lord appears in the middle of the city. The man introduces himself as Limaru Ho, the Lord of Gulltown, and treats Al with an exaggerated politeness. He recognizes the farmer as someone famous for his connection to crops and praises his passion for asparagus. To Al, that sounds almost like a conversation between experts. To Linnea, Limaru's presence is uncomfortable. Even so, the Lord invites Al to dinner at his manor, saying he would like to have a proper chat about the city's problems. At night, Al and Linnea go to the manor. The place is luxurious, but it has a heavy atmosphere. Paintings of asparagus decorate the walls, candles illuminate the hallway, and the servants move around like puppets. During dinner, Al gets straight to the point and asks if Limaru knows anything about the strange phenomenon that has overtaken the city. The Lord smiles as if he had been expecting that question all along. At that exact instant, spears appear around Al, held fast by magic, turning the elegant dinner into a trap. Limaru reveals that he no longer needs to pretend. In truth, the one controlling his body is Vritra, a high demon. This demon takes over the minds of humans and manages to manipulate those connected by crystals. He crystallized part of his own power into a large purple fragment. He placed that power inside the statue of the goddess in the center of the city and began controlling all the residents through it. That was why Gulltown seemed far too peaceful. Linnea was also involved, but not of her own free will. Vritra had used her parents as hostages, forcing the girl to lure Al to the city. The plan was simple: capture the farmer, dominate his absurd body, and use his strength to expand the influence of the demons even further. After all, Al had already defeated Romeo and Ouroboros, so possessing that body would be an outrageous advantage. Al grows angry, but he does not despair. Vritra believes he has won, because Linnea had been observing Al from the start, and because all the citizens were under control. Except the demon made a mistake. Al was not alone. In 2 moments, Linnea was unable to observe him. When the merchants carried the farmer as if he were lost luggage, and when Helen and Rory entered the city in disguise. It was during this interval that Al managed to confirm his suspicion and map out a plan with them. Then Al throws onto the ground a small communication stone given to him by Helen. The stone shatters, lights up with a brilliant glow, and sends the signal. Outside, Helen and Rory spring into action. They dash toward the statue of the goddess and use the power of the protective pendants to destroy the contaminated monument. The explosion of light rips through the square, the statue breaks apart, and Vritra's influence over the residents begins to crumble. For the first time in a long while, the people of Gulltown begin to blink, breathe, and act like real human beings again. Vritra turns furious. Yet he still holds Limuru hostage. He threatens to kill the Lord should Al take a single step forward. Linnea grows desperate, because the Lord of the city was also a victim. She lowers her head for a moment, thinks back on everything she witnessed that day, and reaches a very simple conclusion. Limuru might very well be possessed, but he loves asparagus from the very bottom of his heart. And if there is still any true part of him left inside, that part needs to react to the flavor he spent his entire life protecting. Vritra scoffs, saying that it is merely stupid human food. Al does not accept that. He grabs a Gulltown asparagus, charges forward without hesitation, and shoves the vegetable straight into Limuru's mouth. The scene is completely absurd, but it works. The flavor of the asparagus pierces through the possession like an emotional shockwave. Limuru begins to cry, remembering the refreshing sweetness, the deep bitterness, and the passion he had carried for that produce for decades. His consciousness surges back to the surface, and Vritra's control weakens, leaving the Lord free for a split second. Al wastes no time. He clenches his fist and strikes Vritra with a direct punch. The impact sends the demon flying away, shattering the monstrous form and breaking the final grip over the city. Vritra still tries to scream, outraged at having been defeated by asparagus and a stubborn farmer. However, the light from the pendants finishes purifying the area. Gulltown is finally liberated. The next day, the city breathes once more. The residents express their gratitude, Linnea's parents are saved, and Limuru regains consciousness. Deeply ashamed of what transpired, Linnea looks for Al to thank him from the bottom of her heart. She asks to keep the pendant, not only as a keepsake, but as protection for herself and her family. He agrees without thinking twice, happy that the city can return to producing its legendary asparagus in peace. Except Linnea still had one last thing to say. With a calm face and a dangerous smile, she warns him that when she comes of age, she will travel to the royal capital and steal Al's heart. The farmer freezes, unsure whether that was an expression of gratitude, a threat, or a marriage proposal announced well in advance. Rory and Helen, hiding in the background, nearly explode with jealousy while Al attempts to flee the conversation as he always does. Yet Linnea merely smiles, making it crystal clear that she was entirely serious. In the end, the guy who defeated a high demon using asparagus remains completely defenseless against the most dangerous type of quest, a girl who is far too determined. After resolving the mess in the city of asparagus and returning home as if nothing had happened, Al finally tries to reclaim the simple life he loves so much, except his peace is already under threat from a different kind of war. In the middle of the farm, Fal, Helen, and Rory are helping out in the vegetable garden, wearing work clothes and trying to act as if it were just an ordinary morning. The problem is that all three are wearing the same pendant given by Al, and that immediately becomes fuel for a silent rivalry. Fal notices that she is not the only one wearing that necklace and tries to understand why everyone received an identical one. Helen explains calmly that it was a token of appreciation for the help in Gulltown, but Fal is already annoyed upon learning that even Linnea was involved in that story. To her, Al keeps getting involved with new girls in every single adventure, and no one there can afford to lower their guard. Rory attempts to maintain a serious demeanor, saying that Al's feelings matter more than any unfair competition. But deep down it is obvious that she does not want to be left behind either. While the three argue over who is closest to the farmer, Al is completely oblivious to it, gazing at his crops with an innocent smile. Except that smile dies the very second he notices something far too green spreading across the middle of the garden. The farmer freezes, his face darkens, his eyes gleam with rage, and a manly scream echoes across the entire field. The girls rush over to him thinking some demon has appeared, only to find Al on his knees in front of a patch of weeds. To any normal person, that would just be wild grass. To Al, it was practically a declaration of war. He explains that those pests siphon nutrients from the vegetables, weaken the soil, and can destroy the flavor of the harvest. In his mind, there exists no enemy more repulsive, since he cannot deal with it at that precise moment. Al decides to go into town to sell the vegetables harvested that day and purchase herbicide afterward. He sets up his stall at the market with Fal and Rory by his side, announcing tomatoes, cabbages, radishes, and other produce as if he were defending national treasures. Sales are going well, and even Jake shows up to buy vegetables, saying that ever since he started cooking Al's produce he became a loyal customer. Al is happy about this, mainly because nothing makes a farmer more fulfilled than seeing someone value his harvest. Then a hooded man appears in front of the stall. He tries to act like an ordinary customer, but Al quickly notices that the fellow speaks of himself in a suspicious manner. When the disguise falls off, it becomes clear that the man was the king of Megis. The king came to buy vegetables, but he also had a much more dangerous objective: to ask when Al intends to officially join the royal family. In other words, he wants to know when the farmer is going to marry Fal. Al freezes instantly marriage to a princess, a position in the kingdom, political responsibility. All of that is exactly the kind of thing he wants to avoid. He tries to respectfully decline, saying that he does not think about that kind of future. Except the king changes his strategy and starts playing dirty. He offers the best agricultural lands in the kingdom, fertile fields on the eastern side, and newly developed equipment for the farm. Right then, Al's resistance almost collapses. His eyes sparkle. The farmer's soul screams inside, and for a second he almost agrees to sell his own destiny in exchange for new tools and high-quality soil. Fal realizes the danger and grows desperate. The king still insists, but ends up leaving after buying almost everything, leaving the farmer with a good amount of money. Al appreciates the sale, but his mind has already returned to the first problem of the day. He needs to buy poison to exterminate the weeds before they turn his vegetable garden into a nutrient cemetery. With money in hand and a grim look on his face, Al walks through the city thinking only of agricultural vengeance. It is at this moment that Rex appears out of nowhere, as always, delivering yet another letter. The swift mailman finds Al in the worst possible state, with the aura of a weed assassin, and even finds that heavy energy strange. Al explains the tragedy of the weeds and Rex understands that, to the farmer, that was a real emergency. While they are talking, the two hear a commotion in the plaza. 3 adult men are mistreating a little hooded girl, treating the child like merchandise. They say that young girls can be sold for a good price and try to drag her away by force. Al refuses to stand by and watch that. He steps in between, tells them to let go of the girl, and knocks the men down without any difficulty. One tries to threaten him, but Al responds with a clean blow, causing the rest to lose their courage. When the dust settles, Rex recognizes the girl and grows serious. She was no ordinary child. Her name was Yuria, and she was the daughter of the Demon King, the next leader of the demonic territory. Al is startled upon hearing this, but does not change the way he treats her. Rex then explains to Yuria that Al does not hate demons. He has already fought against dangerous demons, but has also helped those who did not want to hurt anyone. If there is anyone she can trust at that moment, it is precisely that strange farmer who saves people while thinking about herbicide. Yuria, still frightened, reveals that something terrible happened at the Demon King's castle. A demon named Volpdama, who had always taken care of her, suddenly appeared in her room. He acted strangely and transferred his magic to her. After that, everything turned into chaos. She fled without fully understanding, but she is certain that her father and the others are in danger. The problem is that the demonic territory lies on the other side of the ocean, and even by fast boat, the journey would take days. Al has no time to wait. He hands the herbicide over to Rex and asks him to take care of the garden in his place, exterminating every single cursed weed. Rex accepts, despite finding it absurd. The guy entrusts an agricultural mission in the middle of a demonic crisis. Then Al picks Yuria up in his arms, takes a deep breath, and sets off along the path as fast as possible. He simply runs across the sea. Yuria panics, clinging to him while Al dashes across the water as if he were traveling along a road. She screams, thinking that the two of them are going to sink, but Al tells her not to worry. because all they have to do is stop if they start falling. The logic is horrible, but it works. In a short time, they arrive at the demonic territory, a region with a purple sky, dark vegetation, and heavy energy in the air. Yuria can barely believe that she crossed the ocean in such a way. Right upon their arrival, Volpe Dement appears before them. He is powerful, cold, and seems ready to attack without hesitation. Al places Yuria behind him, but realizes that Volpe's strikes are far too dangerous. The demon fires purple magic, opens fissures in the ground, and tries to separate the farmer from the girl. During the fight, Yuria finds Volpe's behavior strange, because he had always been kind to her. Al also realizes that perhaps that demon is being controlled by someone. Before the situation gets any worse, a blonde woman appears and knocks Volpe down by surprise. To Al, that image seems impossible. It was his mother, Lucia, standing in the demonic territory as if she had just stepped out to fetch her son from around the corner. She says she heard everything from Rex and could not let Al enter such a dangerous place all by himself. Yuria is deeply impressed, and Lucia introduces herself as Al's mother with a smile that is far too calm for someone who just knocked out a powerful demon. Al finds it a bit strange, but moves forward nonetheless. Lucia assures them that she only left Volpe unconscious so he could wake up later, and the group sets off toward the Demon King's castle. The place that should have been guarded is far too silent. When they step inside, they find fallen soldiers along the corridors, broken doors, marks of battle, and a heavy atmosphere, as if everyone there had been defeated before even understanding what was happening. Yuria runs desperately toward the throne room and finds her father collapsed on the floor. She throws herself beside him, crying and trying to wake him up. Al checks the other bodies and notices that some are still breathing, though unconscious. The whole scene appears to be the result of an internal struggle. It was no ordinary invasion. Al begins to suspect that someone made everyone attack each other from within, just like what happened to Volpe. Except that in the middle of that tension, Lucia raises her sword against Yuria. The girl does not notice, still embracing her father, but Al reacts at the very last second and catches the blade. His expression changes completely. Up until then, he had been trying to accept his mother's absurd appearance, but that action confirms his suspicion. He glares at the woman and says that she is not his mother. The fake Lucia smiles, asking how he realized. Al answers without hesitation. If she were truly his mother, the moment she saw him, she would have rushed over to hug him tight enough to break his bones. And she did not do that. That answer seems ridiculous, but to anyone who knows Lucia, it makes total sense. The disguise was flawless in appearance, voice, and even behavior, yet it failed on the most absurd and genuine detail of Al's mother. The imposter begins to laugh. She admits she knew Al was no ordinary adventurer, which was why she wanted to test how well he could see through a perfect mask. Then her appearance begins to change. A purple glow covers her body, and her blonde hair shrinks. Her face transforms, and standing before Al is a pink-haired girl, wearing the exact same smile that had been buried in his past. Al loses his voice. That was Ilvia, the girl he met as a child. The girl who stole vegetables to survive, who came to live with his family, who cared for him after the village tragedy, and who died of malnutrition after giving away her own food to keep him alive. Ilvia's appearance leaves Al completely frozen. Her face was the same as the girl he lost in the past, but now she was grown up, wearing dark clothing, with small horns on her head and a smile far too sweet for that ruined setting. She speaks affectionately, calling out to Al as she used to, as if the years, her death, and all that suffering had never existed. Except the energy surrounding her reveals that this was no happy reunion. It was a trap crafted specifically to strike the farmer's deepest wound. Ilvia approaches calmly, saying she missed him, and that she has grown pretty since the last time they saw each other. Al can barely manage a response. He tries to understand whether that is an illusion, a possession, or some kind of demon using her face. However, Ilvia releases a dark energy so absurd that the blast rips through the hall, destroys the castle walls, and even upon seeing that power, Al does not back down. Ilvia becomes annoyed and reveals an even worse truth. According to her, Al was never strong purely through his own efforts. That outrageous strength that defeated dragons, demons, and monsters was born because within him resided the power of the great evil god, the very source of his monstrous stat boost. Al is left in shock. She touches his face, speaks as though she wishes to live with him once more, and tries to drag Al to her side, claiming that if he accepts the great evil god, she can spare the people he loves. Yuria attempts to intervene. The young girl calls out to Al, but Ilvia's expression changes that instant. The smile disappears, her gaze turns ice cold, and she grabs Yuria by the neck as if the little girl were merely an obstacle in her path. Al screams at her to stop, but Ilvia responds that Yuria should not interrupt a conversation between her and her older brother. Yet Yuria continues to resist. Even while being choked, the girl tries to call out to him and prevents Ilvia from completing her control. This makes the fake sister even more furious. She squeezes Yuria even tighter, and at that instant, Al realizes that if nothing happens, the little girl is going to die right in front of him, and then, the world stops. The air freezes, the debris hangs suspended in midair. Yuria remains motionless in Ilvia's arms, and even the evil energy appears frozen mid-flight. Al looks around, unable to comprehend what is happening, until a white light emerges before him. A divine figure appears, serene and radiant, introducing herself as the entity whom people call the Goddess of Goodness. She explains that she had been suppressed for a long time by the power of the great evil god, but Al's pendant served as a connection, allowing her to finally reach that suspended moment in time. The goddess states that she will remove the negative energy limiting his true strength. Al finds it strange because he assumed that evil power was the source of his might, but she explains that it was merely interference. What truly resided within him was something entirely different, an overwhelming affinity for life, for nature, and for the earth. By removing the influence of the great evil god, she awakens in him the ability to create and manipulate life, a power far more fitting for someone who spent his whole life loving agriculture than any dark curse. When time resumes its course, Al reacts instantaneously. He unleashes a bluish glow through the pendant, extends his hand, and causes leaves and roots to sprout from the castle's ruined floor. The plants surge forward like living whips, pulling Yuria to safety and binding Ilvia before she can finish off the girl. For the first time, Ilvia loses her composure. She stares at the roots wrapped around her body, realizing that this power was unlike that of the great evil god. Al uses the plants to immobilize her without causing genuine harm, because no matter how dangerous Ilvia has become, he still cannot bring himself to see her as just any ordinary enemy. However, Volpe de May regains consciousness and enters the hall in a rage. Seeing Yuria injured and Ilvia surrounded by evil energy, he attempts to finish her off once and for all, while Al tries to stop him. Yet Volpe's reaction creates the precise opening Ilvia needed. She breaks free and falls back, but before vanishing, she promises that next time she will meet Al alone, without interruptions, and Ilvia makes her escape. The tension finally subsides. The Demon King awakens on his throne, still weak, and finds Yuria crying tears of relief. He understands that his daughter was protected by Al and expresses his gratitude, but soon asks who that girl was. Al haltingly explains that Ilvia was his younger foster sister, a child who died in the village disaster and has now appeared alive, wielding the power of the great evil god. The Demon King has few answers to offer. He mentions that ancient records regarding that god were either erased or lost. However, he makes it clear that this does not seem like a minor threat. Yuria embraces Al affectionately, thanking him for saving her, and Volpe nearly loses his mind upon seeing the princess clinging so tightly to the farmer. The demon misinterprets everything in the worst imaginable way and begins accusing Al of attempting to seduce Yuria. Al tries to clarify that it is merely a child's expression of gratitude, but Volpe is already practically exploding with fury. The Demon King himself has to order his subordinate to stand down, as after nearly losing his daughter and the entire castle, squabbling over protective jealousy was the absolute lowest priority. Afterward, Al returns to Magus with a heavy mind. He ought to be happy about having saved Yuria and prevented a tragedy in the demonic territory. Yet he cannot stop dwelling on Ilvia's words. If the power of the great evil god resided within him, where did it originate from? And why of all people did he carry that kind of energy? The memory that returns is the worst possible one, that strange dungeon he discovered as a child, shortly before the eruption that destroyed his village. Al decides to seek out Testa. His friend is working in the field, tending to the tomatoes that grew thanks to the Nagari, and is glad to see Al back. However, the mood shifts when Al inquires about the ancient dungeon. Tester recalls that the two of them entered it as children, but states he saw nothing resembling an entity. According to him, Al simply fell, lost consciousness, and immediately afterward the volcano erupted. To Testa, everything from that day remained far too hazy, as if his memory itself had been shattered by the disaster. The response offers little help. Al realizes that perhaps only he witnessed that presence inside the dungeon, and if that was where the evil power entered him, then Ilvia might not be entirely lying. Even so, when Testa attempts to steer the conversation toward something lighter, asking if the tomatoes turned out well, Al reverts for a second to farmer mode. He confirms that they turned out delicious, and for a moment the two seem like mere friends chatting in the middle of the field. Yet Al's life never lets peace endure for long. Upon returning home, he hears a rustling in the bushes and soon spots a female orc emerging behind him. Trauma strikes immediately. Al attempts to run, but this time his frustration speaks louder. After dealing with gods, Ilvia, a demonic castle, and mysteries of the past, he decides he will not be humiliated by an orc ever again. He prepares to finish off the monster with a single, simple blow. Only something strange happens. The attack lacks its previous power. The female orc is not even knocked down the way he expected, but he quickly understands that it is not purely psychological. After the goddess removed the evil energy from his body, that uncontrolled, brute force decreased as well. In exchange, he gained the power to manipulate life, yet lost part of the monstrous strength that made his strikes resemble natural disasters. While Al flees from the orc in the most embarrassing way possible, trying to survive without relying on those absurd stats, Ilvia appears alive elsewhere, satisfied to have confirmed that Al still carries a connection to the great evil god. In the end, Al remains trapped between two paths. On one side, the force of nature that aligns with his dream of being a farmer. On the other, the shadow of the evil god that seems tied to his past, to the dungeon, and to Ilvia's impossible return. And worst of all, the person he wanted to save most in the past has returned as the greatest threat to the future he tries to protect.